Tonight I decided to visit New York City. I was with a friend of mine, and after spending some time in Midtown, we had decided to take a trip up to Washington Heights. I have some friends up there, and we were kind of just trying to kill time before we were going to meet up with them. We had been directed to go to 169th Street. We didn't know exactly where, so when we got to 169th Street, just past Audubon, we decided to take a stop on some steps. The steps led downstairs into a property, but we stayed on the top step. We were sitting there about 10 minutes. We had a couple bags with us. And we had noticed while we were standing there that there were some police officers down the street. After a couple minutes, they had walked away, and we didn't make any other extra note of it. But about 5 minutes after, one officer walked away, an unmarked car rolled up, and we saw about three or four police officers sitting in the car. They got out of the car. Now, at the time, I was dressed pretty much as I am right now. I had on a red jacket that's sitting on the chair, and I had my hood on because it's relatively cold in New York City right now. I couldn't tell you what time it was at the time, but it was at least 12:30. Actually, it was probably earlier than that. But police officers came up, and one of the police officers said to me, take your hand out of your pocket. They were approaching me in a very intimidating nature. They were moving very quickly to get from around the car, which to me seemed very threatening and caused me to hesitate when to take my hand out of my pocket. At which point, rather than waiting for a response, they then proceeded to grab me up and shove me against the wall. Now, I responded emotionally and defensively because I felt like I was being threatened and I was in danger. So I began to resist. I didn't want them to just twist my arm and shove me to the ground and do God knows what to me, because I've already seen that there is a history of police in New York City and other places abusing and mistreating young and black men for reasons that have no logical basis, but they use excuses after the fact to try and justify it. I continued to resist. I shouted loudly that what they were doing was wrong and that they had no reason to arrest me. Enough so to the point that other people on the street started to notice and coming outside, and other police officers started to arrive on the scene. They continued to shove me, at which point they then searched my pockets. They took everything out of my pockets. They stuck their hands in the front of my pants, which to made me feel very violated. They took everything out of my pockets. They removed my hat. They snatched off my head. Snatched my hood off my head, pulled my jacket down around my arms so that I couldn't really move, had my arms pinned behind me, and continued to shove me against the wall and asked me why I was not being cooperative. I told them it was wrong. I told them that stop and frisk was wrong and that they shouldn't be doing it. My companion was off to the distance, trying to keep me calm and trying to reassure me so that I would remain cooperative. After 2 minutes of struggling and them searching all my pockets and dumping everything out, I then stopped resisting as much, at which point they forced me to the ground. When they forced me to the ground, they then tried to twist my arm behind my back. They twisted my left arm much higher behind my back than would be necessary to handcuff me, at which point they then injured my shoulder. Another officer then put his knee onto the side of my face against my cheekbone, hard enough that I felt something crack and that my jaw, when I open it, now clicks. They continued to assert force, and then they handcuffed me. And then after handcuffing me, they continued to search through my companion's things. They didn't explain, they didn't give any explanation as to why they were doing these things, which I continue to assert was against my rights as a citizen, because you essentially assaulted me and used unreasonable force against me for no reason. I was literally standing on the street. I wasn't doing anything aggressive at the time, and you asked one question, and without waiting for an answer, you proceeded to assault me. They didn't pick me up. Continued to search through my companion's things, and after they had cuffed me, started directing me towards the car. Again, there was no conversation. There was no explanation. They did not read me my rights. And I again began to resist, at which point they then shoved me inside the car. I continued to speak to the two officers that were sitting in the front seat, asking why this had happened. Anytime that they, now granted I was interrupting them anytime they tried to explain it because I was still emotional, indignant, and felt very violated and very threatened, and at which point I stopped talking. I asked what their names were. The lady sitting on the passenger side said that her name was Officer Walter. I don't recall what the officers in the driver's seat said his name was. He was a Hispanic gentleman between 5'5" and 5'7", had a squarish head, a short haircut, and large ears. Medium complexion. He was lighter than me, but medium complexion for an individual of Hispanic descent. They said that there had been a shooting nearby, and I asked what the description was of the individual who had been the suspect in the shooting, at which point they didn't give any information. They said, "Do you have any information?" I didn't have a response because I had no idea about this shooting. And in the 10 minutes that we had been standing there, there was no evidence of a shooting. No noise, no sound, no commotion whatsoever. The only thing that we had noticed, just because we're black people in America, was the fact that the police officer had been standing on the corner. They then dropped me off at the police precinct, precinct 33, in the Washington Heights area, which was maybe 2 blocks away from 169th, maybe 3 blocks. And they brought me inside. When they brought me inside, they brought me to the front desk. I then addressed all the officers in the vicinity, talking about how I had felt I had been violated, how I had been, there was no explanation. They didn't approach me as if they were trying to get information. They approached me with the intent to detain me and use lethal force if necessary, because they felt I was a threat. I had done nothing to present myself as a threat to them, and for whatever supposed incident had gone on, if I matched the description, they never offered that information to me. While standing there, I continued to speak my mind and to say that I had been violated and that there was no cause for the force that they used, or even for approaching me, because I wasn't doing anything wrong on the street. Other officers that walked in mocked what I had to say, giving slow claps, rolling their eyes, muttering amongst themselves. One of the officers standing behind the table said mockingly, "Well, at least he's polite," because I wanted to know what was going on and why I had been handcuffed and detained and what I was doing there. At which point, they began to ask for my information. I told them that I had a reason to give them my information because I had done nothing wrong, in which they continued to assert that they would just throw me into a cell, essentially, and leave me there until I gave them the information that they wanted. I stood there for another minute without volunteering any information, at which point I did give my information, my first and last name, and other information like that, and my date of birth, to Officer Walters, who was, as far as I could tell, the only female officer on the scene. After giving some of that information in, the officers that had made the arrest or had detained me walked in to the precinct and then decided to search me again while I was standing there handcuffed in front of the desk. They brought the rest of my belongings in, which included my hat, my wallet, my cell phones, the little bit of cash that had been in my pocket, some papers, and they tossed it all into my hat, the one that I'm wearing right now, and put it on the front desk. There were other objects, somebody else's items, personal effects that had been up there as well, including a phone that looked very much like mine. I believe it was the same make and model, which was some kind of Samsung Galaxy phone that looked like this. was also sitting up there. Then they proceeded to take me to the, I guess, juvenile holding room, at which point they had several officers rotating, watching me while they processed paperwork, looking for information about myself and probably pertaining to the case. After 10 minutes, I didn't continue to assert my claim. Other officers came in. I got the information of the officers. Officer Daly, who was white, sounded like of Irish origin based on his accent, asked me why I was resisting, why I was so angry, and why I wasn't being cooperative, and how ridiculous it was. And Officer Walters walked in and out, and she continued to try and get my information. Officer Figueroa, who was also on the scene and one of the detaining officers, tried to explain their position about how my hands being in my pockets made me a threat, and that the first thing that they're going to do is to eliminate the threat, and that because I didn't remove my hands from my pockets, they were then qualified to use force. They didn't say that that's what they had asked me. They told me that to put my hands up, or they said that they had asked me something that they did not. I know for a fact that the first thing they asked me to do was remove my hand from my pockets, because what was in my hands at the time was two $40 bills that were folded up. And during the entire length of this ordeal, the two $40 bills that had been folded up in my hand were still in my hand. They took everything else off of my person except for those $40 that was in the apparent cause of the commotion in the first place, because I was a threat. At that point, another officer spoke to me. I did not get his name. Balding, seemed to be black or Hispanic or possibly mixed. They tried to explain why the officers are legally allowed to. I also spoke to them about the fact that I believe stop and frisk is unconstitutional. It is wrong. Morally, it is abhorrent. There is nothing about that law that is anything less than justified slave catchers going out and abusing and beating on black people, which is proven to have no positive or even significant impact on the rate of crimes in New York City. But their reasoning was that since stop and frisk is legal, that they are allowed to do things that the public may disagree with, and that we just have to suck it up, in essence. So then, after another about 5 or 10 minutes, they came back, basically told me that they'd be detaining me for a summons, with a summons, or releasing me with a summons, at which point I asked what the summons was for. And since their reasoning for approaching me was to find out information about a shooting that had happened nearby, which I clearly had nothing to do with, they said that they were going to be issuing a summons for an open container violation because there was a black bag with an opened bottle of tequila. The tequila was not on my person at the time. It was actually in the bag of my companion. However, because I was the person they had detained and handcuffed, I was going to be the one who was going to be issued the summons, which in my opinion was simply issued just to justify the amount of force that was used on me, because as of right now, the cuffs cut into my skin, not enough to make it bleed, but enough to cause abrasions on my hands. You can't see it as much on that wrist. Definitely on my right wrist. And the knee that was put on my face has definitely left the soreness and the jaw clicking. Shoulder was just sore, but I don't believe there's any significant bruising. I actually haven't looked at it. I actually just got in. That being said, they essentially said that they were going to be letting me go, and Officer Figueroa then told me that he was going to let me go and give back the bottle, even though they were issuing a summons. They then went back, left the room because they didn't want to hand the bottle to me while inside the precinct. So they then walked outside with me after giving back my information, giving me back my effects, uncuffing me. And after I said what I had to say to the officers that were inside the juvenile holding room, I had nothing else to say. And they were trying to explain their position, and I was not responsive. So then Officer Figueroa walked me out and he said, you know, it's unfortunate we meet good guys like you, and obviously you're a nice guy and you're a good kid or whatever. And, we're just trying to do our jobs, and I'm going to give you back this bottle because, you know, it was a mistake, but, there was a shooting and we were just trying to make sure that we're safe, because if your hands in our pockets, it's taken as a threat, and we're going to do whatever it takes to protect ourselves. And during the process of that logic, which was explained to me also in a juvenile room, I had mentioned that as a citizen and as a black man who was seeing young black men constantly killed by police for whatever justified reasons they have, reasons that extend from resisting arrest, being disorderly, that have been shot and killed, that have been choked to death. I saw 3 armed figures approaching me, and I feared for my life. And as a human being experiencing an emotional reaction, a fear-based emotional reaction, my fight or flight instincts kick in, and my first instinct is to fight. It doesn't matter who it is. We're often told to be compliant with the police to the utmost. However, when the initial reaction, initial interaction is one of assault and aggression, there is no reason that has been given for compliance. And so, therefore, I'm going to act in self-preservation just as they did. Because just as they are human, I am. And I am human. Their position as protectors and officers of the law that are supposed to serve and protect the community should not give them carte blanche to act on impulse, and everybody else is supposed to go right along with it. Because then they're allowed to shoot us and kill us and murder us and then get a free pass and a blank check to say that it was in the line of duty. It's okay. All that being said, he explained to me about how he was just trying to do his job, and it's unfortunate, and now I have a summons that I have to appear in the court in New York City on June 5th at 9:30 a.m. for an open container law violation for alcohol that was not on my person. And they gave back the bottle outside of the precinct, outside of view of cameras, to corroborate the fact that they gave back the bottle. Still have the bottle, and ultimately I am just documenting the course of events, because we all know that this was a matter of profiling. They had no information about the shooter. I'm going to go on the New York Police Department's website and look up information about any cases and everything else that was going on the night of March 25th, 2017, between the hours of 9 p.m. and 12 a.m., just to see if there's any information about the shooting, if a suspect emerges, if they have any information in the next 24 to 48 hours about this individual, because this stop and frisk law has already been proven to be ineffective. And if you want to ask why we're afraid of the police, why we respond in fear and aggression and anxiety and anger, you have to understand the fact that we are unjustly, unfairly, and way too often targeted as individuals. And we should have the right to protect ourselves. But we're not afforded that right, because we're not even afforded to be human. We're not even afforded to have fear, to experience fear. We're supposed to subjugate and divert that feeling of, the human feeling of fear and anxiety that is caused when a black man and a brown man is approached by the police, and comply regardless of what the circumstances is, and regardless how they respond to us, or how they initiate and aggravate and provoke us. It's got to stop.